The picture palace in its golden age, glittering and vast like the courts of some mighty pagan king. This was the empire ruled by Hollywood in the golden days of the motion picture itself, the era of screen idols and saber-toothed tycoons, and storylines that started with an earthquake and then built up to a climax. Its critics said that Hollywood movies were being made by the half-educated for the half-witted, but Hollywood knew that the rest of the world was dancing to its tune. How few ever dreamt that these stately pleasure domes would stand in the end as tombs, great mausoleums to a type of picture and a type of life that was dead. Fewer still, as they saw the walls tumbling down, would know that Australian films had once graced their great silver screen, that Australia had once had a flourishing motion picture industry, and had in fact made the world's first feature film. In the most powerful means of communication yet achieved by man, Australia once had a face for itself and the world to see. That face is now all but forgotten. Not Broadway or Piccadilly, but an Australian city street on a typical Saturday night. A night when many people still manage to tear themselves away from the television set because they like to go to the flicks. And the cinemas still beckon them with all the outlandish glitter of the good old days. On rare occasions, it may be a film that was made in Australia that's packing them in, but it will not have been made by Australians. Close by the cinemas, a group whose values seem worlds apart. But it was this same Salvation Army that pioneered motion picture production in Australia. A Frenchman, Maurice Sestier, opened Australia's first cinema in 1896, the Salon Lumiere in Pitt Street, Sydney. In November of that year, Sestier filmed the Melbourne Cup, less than a year after the world's first flickering pictures were projected on a screen. This Melbourne Cup of 1896 is claimed as the world's first newsreel. But Australian feature production was pioneered by the Salvation Army. Typical of their early efforts was this sermon on the evils of drink. But their first film had dealt with Christian history. Filmed by Joseph Perry in 1899 on a tennis court at Murrumbeena, Victoria, Soldiers of the Cross was the world's first screen drama. America claims this honor for Edwin S. Porter's great train robbery. But Soldiers of the Cross was 3 years earlier, and it was longer. Bert Cross, one of the first Pathé Frères cameramen in Australia, recalls stories of those early days.
The productions were biblical stories, and they were made by Mr. Joseph Perry. Members of his family assisted as technicians. One was a cameraman, and the others worked in the different technical departments. They were making a picture where some of the Christians were to be thrown to the lions. Everything was organised, but they couldn't get a lion skin. So they made do with a tiger skin, and the younger son of Mr. Perry, Reg Perry, he was assigned to wear the tiger's skin. He had to come in on all fours to the edge of the picture and just show the head and shoulders. Well, everything worked well, and they processed the film, but when they projected it, they found that the cameraman had included too much of the tiger. So the head and shoulders are all right, but his two hind legs had boots and socks on. The features in those days, 1,000-footer or 500-footer was supposed to be a feature. The procedure was for the cameraman to join up with a Coles Dramatic Company in perhaps some country town where they were touring. The first day would be spent finding locations and rehearsing the dialogue, action and so forth. The next day, they'd film the whole production. Inside 8 days, the picture would be finished and on the city theatres.
A Melbourne chemist, W.A. Gibson, and a business friend, Millard Johnson, had seen the Coles Bohemian Dramatic Company performing their 10th version of The Kelly Gang. With capital of £400, Gibson and Johnson set out to film this melodrama. Joseph Perry's eldest son, Orry Perry, was engaged as cameraman, and the Coles players as actors for £1 a day. Gibson developed the negative in his own bathroom. The Kelly Gang opened in Melbourne at Christmas 1906. It was a 5-reeler running over an hour, the world's first full-length feature film. It made box office history and started Gibson on his way to the top on one of Australia's largest theatrical chains. Charles Cousin Spencer had opened the Sydney Lyceum in 1905 to show America's The Great Train Robbery. 4 years later, he was producing Australian films in a studio at Rushcutters Bay. All Cousin Spencer's photoplays were financial successes. They were directed by a young man named Ray Longford and brought to the Australian screen its first star, Lottie Lyle. She and Longford starred in this 1911 drama about the convict woman Margaret Catchpole, a story, as the publicity said, that will engross the attention of men, women and children here and elsewhere by reason of its actual truism, while the moral itself must bring tears to the eyes of the strongest. The photoplay of the period was the modest claim made for Spencer's 1912 production, Sweet Nell of Old Drury. It introduced to the screen the great stage actress Nellie Stewart as Nell Gwynn. My name, a byword. My dower, a basket of oranges. The historical events were, the producers admitted, illuminated with touches of romantic license, which was putting it very mildly. Theatrical entrepreneur J.C. Williamson, seen here with Harry Rickards, was next into the field. Like most other picture producers, Williamson's company concentrated on filming well-known melodramas, often the ones being performed in their own theatres. In 1915, the firm hired Sydney photographer Monty Luke to film Officer 666, Get Rich Quick Wallingford, and this one, 7 Keys to Baldpate. These were quickies, crudely produced and filmed, but they were nevertheless popular with local audiences. All these melodramas were later filmed by Hollywood companies. By this time, feature film production was in full swing. Australia was producing love stories, dramas, mysteries, even epics. The first version of Mutiny on the Bounty was produced by Crick and Jones in 1915. The director was Ray Longford. This period of the First World War also brought the full flowering of the propaganda film. Where the Salvation Army films preached temperance, these preached empire loyalty. Australia's response to the Empire's call. For Australia, within our gates, and this Gellin Brown's Hero of the Dardanelles 1915. An Australian screen idol of this time was Snowy Baker. Franklin Barrett, who'd made an early science fiction film, A Message from Mars, in 1909, introduced Baker in 1918. By this time, war themes were being superseded in favor of romances set in the bush. But whether it was as Trooper O'Brien, or the Gentleman Bushranger, or the Jackaroo of Coolabong, or the hero in this Barrett spy drama, The Enemy Within, Snowy Baker was a fair dinkum matinee hero. He always got his man and his girl, not to mention his horse. But even Snowy, for all his popularity, couldn't win 'em all. Footlighters, March 7, 1918, said of this picture, "He is in the role of Jack Ailey, a Secret Service man. He does some clever feats, viewed athletically, such as diving 80 feet, climbing 300 feet, knocking out 4 fighters, and a fast motor car jumping act. But play acting is not his line." This man, Raymond Longford, was Australia's first sophisticated director and brought the country its first screen classic. Joining Spencer's Pictures in 1910, Longford was the success story of his time, although he was to end his career as a night watchman on Sydney's waterfront. He claimed to have invented the technique of the close-up in filming A Maori Maiden's Love 2 years before D.W. Griffith used it in Birth of a Nation. He aimed at the popular market. A fashionable hotel ball, midnight. Outside, the vivid storm. On the upper story, Henry Tracy lay with a bullet in his brain. Who killed him? Well, that was the plot of the Blue Mountains Mystery, a story of sunlight and shadows of Australian society. But it was the sentimental bloke in 1918 that brought Longford recognition and fame. Based on the verse of C.J. Dennis and starring Arthur Touchett as the bloke and Lottie Lyle as Doreen, the film ran nearly 2 hours. It remains one of the high points of the Australian cinema. Years later, Longford tried to repeat his C.J. Dennis success with The Dinkum Bloke for Paramount. And in 1920, he'd filmed another classic Australian tale, Steel Rudd's On Our Selection. Beaumont Smith was described as the daddy of them all by the film industry's trade paper, Everyone's. He produced 17 films up to 1925. Everyone's found it difficult to describe his work. It spoke of apparent crudeness, combined with showmanship of the highest degree, and concluded, the general impression defies criticism. The Sydney police didn't think so, and banned one of his earliest films, Satan in Sydney. Australian production standards were improving rapidly, and another classic soon emerged. A popular comic strip of the day, Fatty Finn, created by Sid Nichols, was adapted for the screen by Tal Ordell, featuring Pop Ordell as Fatty. Kid Stakes was a knockabout romp, but it had its moments of sophisticated charm. Comic strip character came to the screen, Ginger Meggs in Those Terrible Twins. The 20s saw a production boom. Many independents formed companies to make one or perhaps two films and then disappear. But one large company formed at this time, Australasian Films, was to support local production till the silent era ended. Arthur Shirley was known in the trade as the Big Australian. His company, Pyramid Pictures, scored a huge success with its production of Fergus Hume's thriller, The Mystery of the Handsome Cap. Shirley quickly followed up with another thriller, The Sealed Room. A legendary local mystery, Fisher's Ghost, provided the story for one of the most popular of Australian films. Raymond Longford directed the film on location at Campbelltown in 1924. Behind the camera was Arthur Higgins, who shot more film than anyone else in Australia. For the first time, filming was permitted in a courtroom. In front of the camera, Australia now had its own stars. Maud Fame, Vera Pearce, Esther Mitchell, Hedda Barr, Brownie Vernon, Muriel Copland, Louise Lovely, and famous Olympic swimmer Annette Kellerman, here in her vamp swimsuit as Venus of the Seas. In 1926, American star Eva Novak signed a $600 a week contract to play in the most costly picture of the day for the term of his natural life. Eva Novak was imported by the head of Union Theatres, Stuart F. Doyle. Along with her came director Norman Dawn and cameraman Len Roos. This epic film, costing £60,000, was made in Tasmania and at the Bondi studios of Australasian Films. It created a box office record. The special effects were quite remarkable for the time, as in the climax when Eva Novak recognizes the convict Rufus Dawes. In 1927, a royal commission was held into the Australian film industry, principally to inquire into an alleged monopoly held by the American companies over Australian theatre outlets. Australian producers, as well as British producers, were complaining they could not get their films released. The Commission recommended a quota system, plus government assistance for local production and awards for outstanding films. But the only recommendation the government carried out was to establish a Commonwealth censor. A duty placed on imported film did nothing whatever to aid local producers, who got none of the revenue from this scheme. By the late 20s, movies were more popular than ever. Australian filmmakers found the government, alone amongst civilized countries, would give them no protection against the overseas giants. But the box office men were happy. New theatres were going up and a new style was coming in. The McDonough sisters produced 3 films. In the middle of production of the third, The Cheaters, they announced it would be a talkie. Sound was on the way, and on the way up also were 2 producers who would dominate the next 20 years of Australian cinema. One was Ken G. Hall. The other, the production team of Charles and Elsa Chevelle.
Well, I came to meet Charles shortly after I'd returned from South Africa, where I'd spent a tremendous number of my early days, and I was only here a short time, and Charles was looking for a certain type of girl to play the leading part in one of his silent films. This rather dates me, doesn't it? But he saw me and wanted to screen test Maid, and to my amazement I got the part. Of course, at the end of the film we did the trite usual thing, the producer married his leading lady, and that started a 23-year partnership.
I was a film publicity man for First National Pictures, now Warner Brothers Pictures. I'd been to Hollywood as a publicity man. I had one of those ambitions to be a film director which I never expected to realize, until one day John C. Jones, the managing director of First National, bought a German film called Exploits of the Emden. When it arrived, we saw it in the projection room, and we were pretty shocked because we'd spent some money on it, but it was bad, frankly. It was terrible. So, you know, publicity men got all the funny jobs in those days, so it was decided that we would remake the film and that I would make it. So I went to Melbourne, talked the Navy into loaning me the original Sydney, which was engaged in that battle. Took a camera crew aboard to Sydney, went to sea off Jervis Bay, was there for 2 weeks, reshot the whole of the Australian sequences, came back, edited it myself with a girl cutter who joined up the film, wrote the titles because it was a silent film, and to my amazement it made the Prince Edward Theatre, where it ran for quite a time.
The era of the silent film was ending, an era in which Australia had made film history, had produced more than 200 features, had seen its own face on the screen. W.A. Gibson, on the right here, founded the Australian feature film industry in the silent days. The man on the left, Frank Thring Sr., pioneered talkie production in Australia. In 1931, Thring set up FT Films. The name was based on his own initials. In only 4 years before his untimely death, he was to produce 10 feature films. One local talkie was made while Thring was starting FT. This was Showgirls Luck by the American director Norman Dorn. Then from Thring's St Kilda Studios came Australia's first musical comedies. Without dubbing or playback facilities, the crews filmed and recorded sound at the same time. Thring brought to the screen comedian Pat Hanna in Diggers and Diggers in Blighty, and made Dennis's sentimental bloke into a talkie. Australia's favourite funny man, George Wallace, appeared in Harmony Row, A Ticket in Tats, and His Royal Highness.
Tell me, what is your name?
Tommy Dodge.
Dodge.
Yeah.
Have you a birthmark on your neck? A long red scar?
What part of the neck is it on?
On the back of the neck.
How the hell can I see the back of my neck?
Well, may I look?
Yeah? No messing around, you know.
Your Majesty, your name is not Tommy Dodd. You are the rightful heir to the throne of Etonia.
And now I'll tell one. On my right we have the Queen of Italy. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. You want to look after him, he'll go real mad and bite someone before he's finished. He's a rat bag. But while I'm here with the mob, I'm going to be the same as I've always been. Not Your Majesty, but just plain Tommy Dodd.
Your Majesty, Your Majesty, I'm in the wait for you across the sea. Thousands of soldiers to work for you in a land where skies are ever blue.
But I want to be little Tommy Dodd. I don't want to be a king. Molly, my pal, my own little gal, I'm going to miss you. I want to kiss you.
Your Majesty, that could never be. You are a king of royal blood, and not too high for me. But deep in the heart there's a memory that will live till I'm under the sun. For the dear little child that I used to know, and they call me
Young is the king of the Etonia. Hail His Majesty. Bring his soldiers all our claimants. They shall be of king. Come poor and thirsty, come to greet him. Royal declaration brings him. A rise of bells are ringing. His people are hailing, singing. With
In Sydney, a new company was born, Cinesound. Created by Stuart Doyle, head of Union Theatres, it was placed under the control of Ken G. Hall.
And one day, a very tall, gaunt figure came into my office, very thin-faced man with a hooked nose and a very strong personality, whom I'd never previously met, but he was none other than Bert Bailey, an outstanding actor, a great showman. He said to me, boy, he talked like that, boy, I believe we're going to make a film together. I said, well, that's news to me, but I haven't heard about it, but I'm delighted. We built a box out at Cinesound inside the centre of the skating rink, which it was then, from a small soundproof box about 50 by 40, and made on our selection. We had one camera, an old silent camera converted, two very heavy condenser microphones that weighed about 8 pounds apiece, no booms, no anything, no dollies. We made them up as we went along, but eventually we got a film, mainly due to the competence, the keenness, and the ability of the technicians that we had with us, who were all feeling their way as I was. Nobody knew how to make pictures. We were feeling our way, and I was among the people feeling their way.
Hey, didn't I tell him, didn't I? Didn't I tell Joe to get rid of that pet kangaroo of his? Well, he's been down in the green stuff again. Ain't it hard enough to grow a bit of green stuff these hard times without growing green stuff to stuff them damn green kangaroos with? Where is it? What do you mean by being all day getting a bucket of water?
Well, Maloney's the dog got a kangaroo bailed up, and I had to stop and watch it.
Didn't I tell you to get rid of that kangaroo?
It wasn't ours. I ain't seen him for weeks.
Right. Joe! I found the kangaroo! Where was he? Down the well. Is he dead? He smells like it.
Joe, did you get that water from there?
Yes, Mum.
You go down to the well and get that kangaroo out. And mind you get him all out. Get some fresh water from the spring. There's too much body in that.
Cinesound's second effort was The Squatter's Daughter, and in front of the cameras were Jocelyn Howarth and Grant Lindsay, better known as Dick Fair of Australia's Amateur Hour. In 1934, Cinesound produced the most controversial film of the decade, The Silence of Dean Maitland, directed by Ken Hall and photographed by Frank Hurley, who had earlier shot the world's first documentary, In the Grip of the Polar Ice. English star John Longden played the parson whose flesh was all too weak.
Alma. What brings you here?
Curiosity.
What do you mean?
I'm minister, just like other men.
Just like other men. Alma, why are you doing this?
To see if you're alive.
But why? Why?
You must tell me.
This scene of a clergyman's fall from grace ran into trouble from the censor, Cresswell O'Reilly, who had once been a preacher himself and was perhaps not in the best position to judge the film objectively.
Alma, I came here tonight to tell you that I can never see you again alone.
Never? Oh, why?
I tried to explain the position to you this morning. It's hopeless.
But I must see you. What harm is there? Whom I hurt you? Is it Marion?
Of course it's Marion. I ought not to be here now.
Then why are you?
Because there's something stronger than reason, compelling.
Oh, I'm glad.
No, Alma, please.
Don't you realize that I love you?
Yes, it did. It attracted censor trouble. And this is always a great asset to a film producer. I always suspected my good friend Charles Chevelle put in a sequence to get himself into trouble with the censor, because this meant newspapers and publicity, and after all, we're in show business.
Oh, no, I don't think this is quite true. I think really that everything Charles did, he did because he felt it was artistically right for his film. But of course, you know, you have to remember this, that every film or every commodity or every business in the world depends on publicity. And how foolish we would be to say, well, we don't need publicity.
Apart from Cinesound and FT, many independents started, including Noel Monkman and Harry Southwell. The old silent directors, Ray Longford and Beaumont Smith, produced their first talkies, and the Chevelles in their first talkie, In the Wake of the Bounty, discovered a new star.
We were searching for this swashbuckling, handsome young man to play the part of Fletcher Christian. We opened the paper one day and saw just the man, sent for this young man to the studio. He played the part, and at the end of it, he set sail for England, and our little offering went to America. We received a cable from Warner Brothers saying, where can we find your leading man? We replied, somewhere in England. And they found him there, the talent scouts, and of course you know his name, Errol Flynn.
Mr. Christian, sit down. For the desertion of Churchill, Muscat and Millard, I hold the mates of the watch responsible. You will have Hayward turned before the mast and put in irons for this.
Sir, as an officer, I caution you. As a man, I ask you to bear more with the men. 6 months was too long at Tahiti. Your sailors have left their hearts there at the cost of their reason.
You are well informed, Mr. Christian. Are you stating the case of your men or that of yourself?
Sir,
Shut up! Your mad infatuation with that half-caste girl, Isabel, is the talk of the ship.
It's a lie.
Mr. Christian, you dare!
Yes, sir, I dare.
But Australian films most often achieved quality not in epic or melodrama, but the most difficult field of all, comedy. Ken Hall introduced the vaudeville and radio star Roy Reen Moe in Strike Me Lucky. The year was 1934.
Oh, yes, Mr. Lowenstein?
Start the wireless, that's going.
Yes, Mr. Lowenstein. Certainly, Mr. Lowenstein.
Broadcasting from the racecourse. The Bolter one starting at 15 to 1.
How much?
15 to 1.
Thanks very much. Would you believe it? Poor little thing.
Will you come inside and give a look?
Yes, Mr. Lowenstein.
Look! Give a look!
Well, take it off.
What am I going to do with these?
I think they require a few stitches, Mr. Lowenstein.
Get out and take that brat with you.
Very well, Mr. Lowenstein. But there's one thing I'd like to say to you before I go.
What is it?
I never wish to work for a Greek again.
Cinesound's box office hits continued with situation comedies, the Dad and Dave series, and adventure dramas. Shirley Ann Richards starred in Tall Timbers and Lovers and Luggers. With Orphan of the Wilderness in 1936, Ken Hall had another hit. It was filmed in Burragorang Valley and the Bondi Studios, and of all his films, Hall felt this one was a joy to make.
I think I got more pleasure from that film than any of them. We made the human side of it, the last 5 reels, first. And then, because we could get rid of our costs by letting actors go and all those things, we built a woodland setting inside the studio and just waited for these animals. You can't direct animals. You have to wait for them. You can't tell them to do this and do that. So we waited for them, and we used our head a bit by strange noises and all those sort of things, and that's how we got it. But it was a joy to make, really, a joy.
There's another one.
Well, that's probably one of my great weaknesses. I was always going for ambitious projects.
When those logs go over, it's goodbye to the bridge.
Forget about the bridge. The damn now worry. That no game's breaking up? Yeah.
Look at that car.
Right across the bridge. Come on.
After Frank Thring's death and the closing of FT in Melbourne, George Wallace came to Sydney to make two of Cinesound's most popular comedies, Gone to the Dogs and Let George Do It.
What about this, Mr. Randall?
Darling Point.
What's that, Ducky?
No, Darling Point's the place, you dope.
Won't this boat go any faster, Joe? What happens when you pull this? Excuse me, I'll show you what to do.
All right. Oh. Silly looking dope, you'll wreck us.
Well, I like that.
We're gaining on them. I'll say we are. We've practically got them. Look out! Save them here!
Can't miss all these.
Look out, look out, look out, look out.
Let me keep. Now, Joe. Joe.
No, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Oh, Joe, you know.
Oh.
Stop it! Run! Oh!
Hang on! Hang on!
Do it!
Look! Get the dive! That'll stop him!
At the end of the 30s, Cinesound were making the last of the Dad and Dave series, Dad Rudd MP. It was also to be Cinesound's last feature film, though Ken Hall didn't know it at the time.
We knew that a lot of people would be called up and would go to the war. Anybody who could think at that time realized it. But I didn't think it would be the end of film production for Cinesound. I had no clue of that.
The time was World War II, 1941, but the action depicted was the Palestine campaign of World War I. Charles Chevelle, who'd won a Commonwealth Government Prize for his second talkie, Heritage, now with the cooperation of the Australian Army, made Australia's first international film, 40,000 Horsemen. This film received good notices in America and England, and is still outstanding for its spectacular action scenes. "40,000 Horsemen" gave John Goffage his first important role. He was soon better known as Chips Rafferty.
The most important thing when I think of it about Horsemen was the fact that it for the first time created an Australian image. You know, so little was known about us in those days, not so much geographically, but from a point of character and people and the way they ticked and so on.
Where are you from, mate?
Glasgow.
Where's that?
Huh? You've never heard of Glasgow?
Shut up, Jim.
Stone the crow's red. A man can't be expected to know every flaming village in Ireland, can he?
Village? In Ireland?
Well, you'll...
Opened the Leicester Square Theatre, London, after many years being closed. It played for 2 big seasons on Broadway with the repeat. It played on television. It went from Russia to Tehran, and it really played the world. And I think that it was, if you like to look at the word propaganda, it was a very good propaganda film.
Chevelle followed up in 1944 with Rats of Trebuk, starring another new face, Peter Finch. While Chevelle concentrated on the box office, Cinesound was producing war newsreels, one of which received Australia's first Hollywood Oscar, Kokoda Frontline, by the legendary cameraman Damien Pera, who was killed in action.
We worked through the night with it, cut it, recut it, changed it, recut it, put sections into it of other film that Damon had shot. And it turned out very, very well. Oh, months later, very many months later, we learned that it was, it had an Academy Award, which of course was basically due to Damon. It came to Cinesound and to me because we produced the film, and these things always go to the producer. It was a combined effort at Cinesound, and we were all very happy. And it's still the only Oscar south of the equator.
Eric Porter's film A Son is Born featured Ron Randall and Muriel Steinbeck, along with John McCallum and Peter Finch. In the same year, 1946, Columbia revived feature production at Cinesound with Smithy, also starring Ron Randall and Muriel Steinbeck. But it was to be short-lived. This was Ken Hall's last feature. 2 years later, Charles Chevelle produced a film of pioneering days, Sons of Matthew. It made good money in America, but production costs here had soared.
The only thing that mattered was the merit of his film. Even I, as his wife at times, said, look, Charles, do we have to retake this film? Can't we get by this scene? Don't remake it. And he said, you know, my dear, we have more chance of getting our money back, even if we go over cost, from a good production than we have if we come out, get pats on the back from our men who are backing it, and don't turn out a good job. So Charles, in this way, perhaps gained a lot of criticism, but he couldn't help it. The picture was the one thing that mattered, and perhaps the people backing us were very annoyed at the time, but they got their money back, and his pictures broke records.
Jeddah, the first all-Australian film to be entered in the Cannes Festival, was Chevelle's last major production before his death. The Overlanders, directed by Harry Watt for the British Ealing Studios in 1946, created widespread overseas interest in Australia. Followed by Eureka Stockade, it began a series of overseas productions that's gone on up to the present. With budgets that no local producers could equal and distribution outlets overseas, some of these films were successful. Some were flops. They preserved the skeleton of an industry here. But they were not Australian films. Too many went for the superficial, the novel and bizarre aspects of Australia. Earlier local films had projected something, however rough, of the inner spirit of the country. These films saw Australia through the eyes of strangers. But even to overseas companies like 20th Century Fox, which made the Smiley series, no government incentive has been offered to stay and produce more films here. Still less has it been offered to local producers. A Lee Robinson-Chips Rafferty partnership to produce low-budget films was short-lived and disastrous. Since then, local feature makers have been unable to obtain financial backing in this country. Once Australia produced 10 to 15 feature films a year. Now not even one a year. Those that are produced are adapted from bestsellers by overseas producers. In the meantime, 80% of the cinemas in Australian capital cities are controlled by 3 overseas production studios. Cecil Holmes' 3-in-1, made in 1956, and one of the last purely Australian features, was sold to 12 European countries and won a prize at a Czech festival, but was denied screen space in its own country for 3 years. Feature films will not be made by Australians or shown in Australia without federal aid and a quota system. These things have been recommended by a Royal Commission of 1928 and a Senate Select Committee of 1963. but nothing has been done. Has Australia so little interest in her own identity, so little pride, that she will willingly be dumb in the language of the 20th century, the film language that she helped to invent?
Hey! Who are you burying, Tom?
Don't know who he is. Just a union man.
Steep, eh? When you're walking? Steep? You ought to see the hills up round where I come from. All the blokes there have one leg longer than the other for walking round the hillsides. I remember once there was an old miner called Charlie Goldsmith, and one night he was climbing up the hill to his hut when suddenly he crashed to the bottom of it.
Bless my soul, 110 in the shade.
I wouldn't know, mate. We ain't in the shade.
During my 50 years' experience, at no time has the Australian technicians and cameramen fallen down on the job. They've had to work with equipment that was not modern, makeshift in most cases, but they still produced quality equal to the world's best.
If the government had seen fit to build a national studio and put Ken Hall at the helm as the executive head and Charles as the artistic head, today we would have had a very fine Australian film industry.
There won't be a future unless or until men with initiative and drive, who are basically and essentially showmen, arise or come forth. Showmanship is the whole answer to film production. It's not how well you make a film or how brilliant the direction is or the acting, it's what you make. This is the answer all along the line. Too many people pick up a script and say, oh, that's quite good, we'll make a film out of it, with no idea if they're going to be able to persuade the public to pay money at the box office to come and see it. No industry can be founded on masterpieces that don't get people to go and see them. The only industry that you will get in this or any other country is a commercial industry. And the films I made were straightforwardly commercial. And only one of them failed to make a profit for the company, and it broke even. Out of 17 films that I made for Sydney's, all of them made money. Don't forget that between 1931 and 1940, when the war stopped us, 75 Australian financed and made films had been made. Since that date, up to now, about 15 or 16 all Australian films have been made. Now, this is wrong. Something has to be done about it.